Hey friends, good to see you guys again. It's this particular module is talking about alternative analysis methods, and by alternative I pretty much mean either qualitative or mixed methods, which if you're unfamiliar, mixed methods is going to be more of a combination of quant and qual combined in different ratios. It doesn't have to be 50-50. A lot of the mixed methods work I do with students is going to be, say, 80-20 with quant and qual, or it could be 80-20 with qual and quant. I mean, it can go either way. But these alternative methods of analysis, here's going crazy there. There we go. These alternative methods of analysis are about kind of a different perspective. Like we talked about with quant, quant is going to be very, the point of quant is generalizability. You want to be able to kind of gesture like this. Everyone feels this way. Everyone thinks like that. Anybody who's in this group shares this opinion. You're trying to make these kind of broad generalizations, whereas qual, of course, you're not. You're saying this particular group of people indicated X, Y, and Z, whatever it happens to be. All right. So I've got a few examples here of where you might have run qualitative analysis and some of the things that you might want to be aware of, and kind of the benefits of the qualitative analysis, as well as the style of analysis that's utilized. Right. So in this first example, and before we go any further, by the way, the picture on the bottom right there, the guy with the glasses there, that's not me. In case you're wondering, I had a student ask, "Hey, Dr. Joe, is that you?" And I'm like, "No. I mean, no, it's Bill Gates, if you must know. It's Bill Gates, and that's not actually a real mugshot. He was touring a police station." Anyway, the research we're examining here is going to be inner city youths who cease to commit crimes. Right? So basically, individuals with a criminal past who make some sort of massive life change and kind of turn away from this criminal background. Right? And qualitative research, in contrast to quant, qual typically deals with what's called a primary question or a primary research question. Right? Quant doesn't really do that. With quant, we might have 2 or 3 research questions that we want to address, and thus we have 2 or 3 hypotheses in line with that. But with qual, we're dealing with pretty much a large question, and then we have, like, further data that addresses that from a variety of angles. So the primary question in this case is, what caused them to turn away from crime? So what was it that led to this positive life change that changed them away from this life of crime? Right? And if we look at how we're going to select our participants, we've got a very specific selection criteria. If you are a qual person, if your research is qual or mixed methods, I want you to hear me very well on this. Qual requires very specific selection for participants, right? You want to know who is in your study, and you want to exclude people who maybe would not provide accurate or informed data, right? You're not trying to bias the study. Don't get me wrong. You're not saying, oh, well, this person's going to agree with me, so I'm going to pick them, and that person feels the same way, so I'm going to pick them. No, it's about making sure you pick people who have the appropriate information and knowledge so you can get good data. Right? So in this case, we're picking people who have a criminal past, have some sort of positive life change of some form, and then a statement indicating that they have felt a positive life change, that they're no longer committing crimes and are living the clean life. Right? So we have these 3 selection criteria. We can go a step further, by the way, and be more clear about criminal past. Does that mean misdemeanors? Does that mean speeding tickets? Does that mean felony murder? So where do we draw the line? When we say criminal past, many of us might have had speeding tickets in our past, which is technically a criminal act, right? But it's a moving vehicle violation, right? So that doesn't really count the same. Positive life change is kind of subjective, and then the statement too, there's various aspects to that too. But then also, you want to make sure your participants aren't just on their way out of prison saying, that's it, I'll never reoffend. Hopefully they will have been released from prison and be, say, 5 years with no offense, right? Or 2 years with no offense. Some kind of time frame that indicates that they, in fact, have made a positive life change. Method here for data collection, interview. And it could be interview, it could be focus group, it could be any number of things, but really interview or focus group is going to be the better way to go. With a sensitive topic like this, I might lean towards interview, only because, some of this stuff is going to be very, very personal, and people might not want to share what caused them to make this life change. It might be shameful, it might be hurtful, whatever, right? So an interview is going to be a good way to go, and it provides this kind of one-on-one that's very open with the participant. And with the data, the nice thing about qual is you're meant to go in without any kind of assumptions, biases. You let the participants tell you exactly what the story is. which I really like, actually. I'm a big quant guy, but I love that aspect of qual, right? And so what you might be looking for is, say, 4, it could be 2, it could be 3, but in this case, maybe 4 main themes that you can kind of create based on the responses you get, right? So in this particular example, why do I put transitions on my slides? It's ridiculous. Oops. There we go, back on. So how is it useful? When we get these main themes, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to take the data and look for common things that are said, right? Well, I found Jesus, or I had a child, or I fell in love, or I hated who I was, right? Some of these people maybe hit rock bottom when they can contemplate suicide, right? So what we're looking for is what themes, what were the 4 main things that drove them to this positive life change, right? And how did they manifest? The nice thing about this is it allows us to use this in an informative way. So, for example, rehabilitation. If you're unfamiliar, this country has a terrible recidivism rate. Our prisons could do a lot more to help our prison inmates not reoffend. Essentially, this is why they refer to them as revolving door prisons, because essentially people offend, go to prison, and then very often return shortly afterwards with a new offense. So how can they be rehabilitative? How can prisons help people to make a positive life change so that they're not inclined to reoffend when they leave, and they can make a positive life change on their way out, right? And the nice thing too is once you get this foundation of categories, you can build upon this and develop good quantitative studies, right? So you've done this, say, with maybe 5, 10 participants in this qualitative study. You could roll this out to an entire prison, for example, of say 1,000 inmates, by using quantitative methods, right? So you can start with this good foundation, you can find the themes that seem to resonate, and then kind of expand this out and find out more information from a larger prison population. Another example with this, I really like this one because it has to do with relationships. And I find that quantitative research with matters of love and romance and relationships is very contrived, I guess is a good way to describe it. My wife and I have been married for 17 years. And when I look at my wife, I don't think, 96, right? I don't think of the number. I don't quantify how much I feel about her. I just feel that I love her, right? So putting a number on it is kind of ridiculous. So as much as I love quant, it has its limitations. This sort of study is pretty good because what it does, it looks at how the remote, the TV remote or the Apple TV remote or whatever you use, is a measure of relational power. Right? So who gets to use it, who gets dibs, basically, on the remote, and how that's a reflection of relational power. Right? So once again, a primary research question is relational power exerted in TV watching. Right? The selection criteria, in this case, you have to be in a romantic relationship, cohabitating for at least 1 year, and a TV with remote control, which in this day and age, of course, almost everyone does have a TV with remote control. But I might take it a step further. Right? In this case, we're talking about romantic relationships and cohabitating for at least a year. You know, if you've only been together a year and you started cohabitating right away, that might look different than if you've been together for 10 years and you've only been cohabitating for 5, right? So that's a little bit gray too. And then when we talk about a romantic relationship, one of the methodological concerns that we have to have too is, are we talking about just heterosexual relationships, or would we include relationships from members of the LGBTQ plus community, right? So, you know, do we want to stick to just heterosexual couples, or do we want to expand it to all couples, right? Do we want to include triads and thruples and things like this too, right? So there's any number of variations we might utilize, but we want to be clear on this. And for the record, by the way, it is acceptable to exclude certain groups if they don't meet your selection criteria, right? It's not discriminatory to say, well, you know, in this case, we're only looking at heterosexual couples and exclude homosexual couples. That's not actually unethical if you make it clear they're not meeting the criterion for your study. Right? But if you want to study all couples, then you really should include all couples in that respect. So just throwing it out there. Interview method, once again, make sure, if you're taking notes, I would make sure to say that you would interview these people separately. Right? We don't want to just interview a couple together because the responses will be very different if they're both sitting right next to each other. Right? I would actually separate them and ask both members of the couple separately. Right? The data itself, so what they found in this particular study was the remote control was actually a source of conflict and frustration. So it was kind of, if you read Lord of the Flies, it's kind of like the conch, right? So who holds the conch holds the power. And this, of course, caused fighting and ultimately a death of a islander. What they found was men typically dominate, but that in gay and lesbian couples, there was actually similar conflicts, but they were more inclined towards resolution. So it wasn't necessarily a point of contention so much as a smaller conflict where they eventually did resolve it and found something to watch. And it's useful because it allows us to examine things like resentment and power struggles and conflict in a way that's very organic, right? It also allows us to examine dynamics within a relationship. Many people will say, oh, he did this or she did that or whatever like that. But if you look at what this study did is who gets to pick what we watch. This might be a typical night in my house, right? So I love college football. So college football might come first. If there's no college football games on, okay, well then I might get second choice as well, which is something related to Star Wars. Huge Star Wars fan. But if neither one of those are available, for whatever reason, for whatever ungodly reason, neither one of those are available, I would give, in this case, according to the study, give my wife the remote and allow her to pick what we're going to watch, which actually New Girl's a really good show, but whatever. Anyway, she would get the pick. And so they've identified this chain of command of male, male, female, and heterosexual couples, right? They found that it was the male's choice. The first two choices went to the male, followed by the female. And what's interesting about this is if you would just ask these as quantitative questions, the male probably wouldn't say, oh, well, I dominate, I call all the shots around here or whatever. And maybe some males would. But I think this gives a better idea of how this power struggle plays out and how males and females are oriented in regard to this. So a situation where I think qual is probably a better way to go, just because it allows you to get the nuances of what you're trying to examine and doesn't have the contrived nonsense that you might get from a quantitative study that focuses on generalizability.